Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
Excellent.
I think it's all
So this is
working.
excellent. Yeah. So this is our niche conversations, our 14th one. So we've already gotten to the 14th of these. I'm Jessica DeWitt, and I'm one of the editors at the Network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I am joined by Alice Mold. Would you like to introduce yourself more?
Yeah, so I'm in the fourth year somehow of my PhD at the University of Bristol and the University of Exeter, so in the UK. And I'm an environmental historian, and my PhD tracks the kind of production of taxidermy animals, so from skinning through transportation, and then taxidermy, and then display to kind of look at the creation of natural history specimens as a kind of process
Mhm.
to do with materiality and transformation.
Awesome. So I invited you here today because of your article, which deals with that topic, Fencing Victorian Taxidermy in the Present. And this was originally posted on Environmental History Now,
Yeah.
and NiCHE has a partnership with this website that Environmental History Now's focus is publishing the work of early career scholars who are women, trans, non-binary, and gender expansive people. So its kind of aim is to diversify the field and give a place for where these early career scholars can create community and build an audience. So every month or so, we repost one of these articles just to broaden their reach, and this is one of them. So I thought that we would start today with kind of the broader ideas in your post. So in your post, you talk about sensory history. So
Mm.
I wondered if you personally could think about like how you think of his sensory history, how you define it, and what the benefits and challenges of sensory history are for historians and environmental historians specifically.
Yeah, sure. Um, so I think sensory history is really anything that kind of engages with the way that people experienced things in the past, often with a sensation kind of attached to it. So how they experience the world kind of through and with their bodies. Um, and I think history in general is very visual. That's kind of its default setting. So when things are written down, and then when we kind of read them as historians, and when we visualize them in our mind, it's all very visual. Um, and I think with sensory history and also with environmental history, we're always trying to argue about how immersive and how wide the environment is, the kind of the literal environment, and also the varied geographies of the past, how they were more than simply just seen. So that might be like the actual five senses, or it might be kind of more of an abstract kind of feeling of how something was felt in the past. So it has like strong links to history of emotions as well, I think.
Mhm.
Um, so that would be my definition, kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
But the benefits, I think that it's always going to offer a kind of idea of a shared experience in the past to some extent. Um, so, with relation to environmental history, this doesn't mean that in what I write about that this isn't kind of a practice of domination. That these are always men, usually men who practice kind of hunting and taxidermy. It doesn't mean that this wasn't an exertion of power and influence over animals and environments in saying that there was a shared experience, but it's just about kind of making these objects and animals and nature more widely is kind of more 3D, more fleshed out.
Mhm.
Um, and in my work, that's about thinking about how people interacted with skins, with bodies, with fur, with bodily fluids. Um, as this was something that was like very messy, very
Mhm.
tactile. Um, but with taxidermy, it's something that's often considered as a sort of cultural object because obviously these animals were killed to become taxidermy, often in a really like a colonial context. So this is the British imperial hunt, and then this is a dead animal that's literally becomes a trophy. It's kind of this symbol of the patriarchy and of colonialism and of conquest, and then it's literally
Mhm.
put on display like in a museum or in someone's home. But I still think that these creatures, these skins, they're more than just symbols. So I think the sensory element helps to kind of give the animal more shape in the past when we think about how it was touched and handled and eaten or smelt. And it can add a bit of the kind of environment back in as we can think about how these objects influence humans and other animals as well, like drawing in insects. So it helps to think about how these were real things, basically, and could be agents. So in terms of the challenges, I mean, there are quite a few because sometimes people just, I mean, I've just said already how it's such a history is so visual, normally, how we normally write it. So sometimes these things are just really missing in primary sources. And it's through things like practice. So I practice taxidermy once that we can add these kind of things back in. As I mentioned in the article, no one ever mentions the smell or the noises associated with skinning and with taxidermy. But when I did taxidermy, even though these creatures had been in a freezer, they were like thawing, but they still smelt so much that it was really bad. And the smell really hung around. It was like on my skin, on my fingers for ages, even after washing my hands. So, and then if we're thinking about how these would have been hunted in the field, in kind of in colonial landscapes, they would have started rotting really quickly, and they did. But hunters still don't mention this sensory element, this smell. So it's really clearly missing. So that's obviously a difficulty. But it's also a benefit in that it can kind of help us to think about why this is missing. And about these kind of, this might be because of expectations of masculinity, as admitting that a smell was disgusting might seem unmanly, or as if this hunter wasn't quite at home in these landscapes that they've supposedly colonized. Or it might tell us about how we ourselves are really distant from death and bodies and that kind of thing. So it can tell us something about, yeah, our own feelings towards animals. Sorry, yeah, does that answer that mostly?
Yeah. No, I find the topic like very interesting. I'm very drawn to sensory history, but I haven't written a lot about it. I didn't. One of my chapters in my dissertation dealt with technophobia. So I was looking at like how this one park was created so that timbering could happen in it, right? And there wasn't a public outrage until people could hear it happening. So the technological advances led to louder trucks and louder saws, etc. So people started to realize it was happening. They were sensing it with their ears, and they were annoyed by that sound, right? So that's one element that I looked at in my research. But it really calls on us to empathize, I think, with our subjects and to really think about the human experience. Like we're connected to these people in the past because we also are humans, right? But it's also challenging, I think, particularly as a early career scholar, in that some of it you have to just inference from your personal experience. Like there isn't going to be that textual document that says this is how I felt. Like, oh. there's a sense. I dropped the phone and felt that.
You fell over.
Yeah, I got my hands were when I hit the cord. Anyways, there isn't a textual document that's the person in the past is gonna be like, I felt hot on this day, and I was hearing this and this and this. Every once in a while, there's that, right? But not very often. So it's kind of, it doesn't feel as concrete. So when you're writing about something new or you're an early career scholar, it may feel like there's openings for criticism of your. That's how I feel when I'm writing about sensory history. I don't know if you have felt similarly.
Definitely. And I mean, even when we experience senses, it's so, it's really hard to put them into words what you're experiencing, let alone when you're trying to then interpret what someone else is experiencing as a historian. Because the boundaries between senses, they're not discrete. So when we say look at an animal skin, we see it, but we also kind of we're drawing on our past experiences of, say, feeling fur when we look at it. So we might kind of have an edge of the haptic, so a touch as well when we're looking at it. But then trying to turn that kind of these experiences when it's kind of in this between place, when you can't necessarily say this is one of the five, it's kind of this lived embodied experience. How do you put
Yeah.
that into words? And then how do you interpret that in the past? It's a
Mhm.
real challenge.
Yeah. So, at some point you decided that you wanted to try taxidermy, right? So I just wanted you to kind of go through like what your thought process is, how you reached the decision to try taxidermy, and kind of how you made this goal a reality.
Mhm. Yeah, so I had been studying taxidermy for 2 years by the point that I practiced it, because I did my MPhil, so my research masters, looking at taxidermy as well. And for those 2 years, people just kept asking me, have you tried it? And I was starting to feel like a bit of a fraud because I hadn't. And especially as all of my arguments are about materiality and this kind of skin to skin contact between animal bodies and humans, and about handling and craft. So yeah, I was feeling like a bit of a hypocrite to not having done it myself. Yeah, you can't argue that the animal is more than symbolic when you're only looking at it as a symbol on the page. Um, but I also wanted to know a bit more about the kind of the nitty gritty kind of techniques that would go along with taxidermy. Because when you read about it in handbooks, in Victorian handbooks, it's really quite hard to work out what some of the detail is kind of means. So I wanted to learn this technique through practice. And lots of these books also say that there's only so much that you can learn from the page, that you really have to do your learning kind of with and through the hand. Um, and I also wanted to learn a bit about our kind of current relationship with taxidermy, like who is the taxidermist, who else is going to be on the course, given that it used to be so popular and is now kind of only popular in some sort of hipster circles. Um, but yeah, I was really nervous because I think lots of people make the assumption that I'm really into taxidermy, that I kind of love it, whereas I'm just sort of interested in the relationships between humans and animals. And I'm also a vegetarian, so I'm not really used to kind of being around dead animals. So yeah, I was very nervous, but my funding body nicely agreed to fund it for me. And they actually sent me and my supervisor, who's the historian, the environmental historian, Peter Coates. He was really enthusiastic, actually. He really wanted to come. Not quite sure why. And it was a really surreal experience. We were in this guy's kitchen, doing it at his kitchen table, and he had all of these cats, living cats, and they were like circling around our legs whilst we were doing this taxidermy. So yeah, it was really odd. And also my the thing I was taxidermying was a rat, but it was very obviously a pet rat. And my supervisor's animal was a very fluffy rabbit. Yes. And I think this kind of this thing that they were very clearly companion animals, pet animals, and then we had these cats around our legs. It was all kind of slightly awkward and uncomfortable. Um, and then on the drive home, it was about an hour drive home, and me and my supervisor barely talked because I think we were actually slightly traumatized, because I somehow wasn't expecting it to be quite as gruesome as it was. Even though I knew, what it was and what it would entail. It still shocked me. It still hit me. Um, but it was very useful to have a supervisor who was willing to go through that with me, because he's now very kind of knowledgeable on the mechanics of the subject. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah, I love that. I love that bonding experience with your
Yeah.
supervisor. That's great. Um, yeah, and to have him like really understand what you went through, like that's very helpful in the process, I think.
Yep.
I know a lot of people who have supervisors who are very kind, but they don't know everything about the subject. So that's nice
He
to
knows
have that.
everything now.
Yeah, yeah. So we have I brought your rat up here on the
Yeah.
screen. So what did you learn from this experiment? I guess it was an experience, but I mean, experiment.
Yeah.
Experiment,
Um,
experience. I guess
it was
it's
both.
both. I'm getting confused, but yeah. So what did you learn from this experience, and was it worth it? Do you recommend this kind of activity for people who have topics that could benefit from it?
I do really recommend a kind of if your project or what you're working on has a potential um, kind of practical element, I would really recommend it. I don't know if I'd recommend taxidermy to everyone per se. It's firstly, it's really difficult. It's really, really fiddly, and I'm not very good at it. This actually was quite a good picture of the rat. Its body is actually like really elongated. It's not really stuffed properly at all, and I refused to touch it after we finished the course because you're meant to keep massaging them for a few weeks, I think, afterwards to keep them kind of in shape. And
Yeah.
I just didn't want to do it, which was, not great on my part. So he became really, really stiff.
Mm.
And this was taken just the day after, so he got even worse looking actually. Um, and it also it requires a strange amount of strength. You've got to break bones whilst you're doing it. So I learned that I'm not very strong. I'm not very good at it. But it also put me in this weird position where um, I never want to kind of glorify these white kind of imperialist hunters. I never want to be in that position, but I'm also like strangely impressed by the skill. So I'm in this strange position now where I'm trying to kind of to balance this being impressed by the skill and the artistry of it, whilst also being kind of horrified always by the decimation of the animal populations and things. So it's it's practicing it has been really useful for reflecting on that. Um, and also it did make me learn a lot about the mechanics of things like skinning, which I just did not understand before because you just cannot understand them from the page. Um, and I think, as I suggested earlier, it really helped make me think about taxidermy as an environmental agent and as the body as a kind of ecosystem. So it made me think about bacteria and the processes of kind of bodily breakdown and the impact that a body could have on its surroundings. And this idea of kind of the traces that it leaves on its environment led me to thinking about interactions with other animals. So after doing taxidermy, I started looking a lot more about insects and insects consuming skins. But I also started researching how scavengers would often steal lots of skins from hunting parties. So these things like hyenas would often creep up and steal skins. So these were still very much kind of organic environmental beings. And this was obviously much to the consternation of the hunters and the taxidermists who were trying to make them kind of static and controlled. They still had this kind of element of liveliness, even in their deaths and kind of through their deaths. So yeah, it helped me kind of think about this context, this environmental context, and it really, more than anything, it just kind of helped me think about the animality of taxidermy and that it isn't this cultural thing, that it's this true kind of hybrid thing. Um, that however much it is the kind of result of manipulation and control, um, it's so dependent on kind of organic materiality and it's just so visceral, and that's what's really stuck with me. So I'm not sure I would recommend it because it literally does stay on you and with you for a very long time afterwards.
Yeah, I don't think that your article made me want to try
Yep.
taxidermy. Still not my thing, I don't think, but um, I really enjoyed the article in that it really, well, I learned about taxidermy without doing it.
Yeah.
So that's nice. Um, but also, it made me think of ways to think of my own work in from different angles, or maybe even gave me the inspiration or maybe more courage to do so, which I think is
Mm.
really important when you see other people doing this kind of work. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's something that I can do as well, or I can do in this certain way. And we're all kind of speaking to each other. And that's the beautiful thing about scholarship, in my opinion. So I
Hmm.
want to thank you for writing this piece and for joining me today. This was a
Oh,
great
thank you for having me.
conversation. Yeah, so yeah, check it out on our website or on Environmental History Now. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.